So you want to make sure that your contracts, when they're in writing, they mitigate the risk. And so you want to sit down and you want to think about, what are the risks that I might run into as I'm creating this contract? Are my underlying costs going to go up? Do I have suppliers that are relying on commodities that might not be available? When you're first creating those contracts, you want to sit down and go, what are my underlying risks? What are the things that might happen in the next 12 months that I need to be aware of? Today, what I want to do is I want to talk about mitigating financial risk. And I want to talk about mitigating financial risk, especially during times of economic fluctuations, right? Uncertainty. And it's interesting because I had a call with one of my clients yesterday. And one of the things that he was saying was, 2020 has been an amazing year. 2021 was amazing. And suddenly in 2022, things have changed suddenly, right? And it changed all around March, right around the war that started taking place in Ukraine. And he's like, it's hard to make plans for things that are going to happen. He wants to revamp his fleet. He wants to get new cars in, but at the same time, he doesn't know if this year is going to operate like last year. Now he's starting to see the market open up. He's starting to see better talent that's becoming available for him to hire. And of course, he's got that PTSD of, those moments when we all experience where we weren't able to hire people too. And so he's like, I want to grab everybody while I can still grab everybody. And people are coming to me. But at the same time, things are starting to change and he's starting to feel that. And so today, what I want to do is I want to talk about mitigating financial risk, especially during these economic fluctuations. And when I mean economic fluctuations, I'm talking about economic volatility. I'm talking about the constant rising in prices for things that you have to buy in order to continue with your business, right? Everything at some point tends to somehow piggyback on fuel prices, right? There's also that uncertainty when it comes to procuring ingredients or certain parts because, things are harder to get, right? Especially if they're coming in from overseas. And we're also seeing market volatility even with customers, right? Because customers are starting to also feel that volatility on their side. And today, what I want to do is talk about really how do you mitigate your risk? How do you continue to thrive by the same time mitigating those risks so that you're agile, so that you are able to adjust the things that you don't see that may be coming, things that are associated with this market volatility. And one of the things that I want to talk about that's really important when it comes to being able to make adjustments, right? Especially for people that are in logistics, where they're relying on fuel and really everybody, because it's just a trickle down effect. Everything at some point is dependent on logistics, right? That's going to be impacted by fuel prices. And one of the most important things that you can do is control those contracts, really create flexibility within your contracts. And first of all, when we talk about contracts, right, it's important to look at it as it's not just a piece of paper, right? When you get that contract to someone or you're receiving a contract, it's not just a piece of paper, right? And it's not just a financial obligation. First of all, there's a person at the other end of this piece of paper, right? This person has feelings. This person, wants to do well. They're excited about this agreement that they're about to partner with you on. They have dreams. They want to leave a legacy. And that person, whether you one day see them or not, right, after this contract is over, you want to leave this contract in terms where, if we meet on the street, if we see each other again, it's still a pleasant relationship, right? We want to leave that person whole at the same time, making sure that we're also progressing in our goals too with that contract. And so, I really like that quote that Maya Angelou says, and she says, people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. That's what Maya Angelou says. And I'll say that again. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so when you're creating those contracts, you want to create a contract that really preserves that relationship, right? That creates that sense of fairness, even in this time of uncertainty, right? Because you want to have that relationship, you want to put a good faith effort out there that you want fairness for both parties. And you want to, leave that person in a better position than when you found them if you're doing business with them, right? You want that in your contract. And that contract is a way of doing that. And first of all, when you're doing a contract, a good contract, it really consists of, at least one main part, right? And that contract, what that is that contract is fair for everybody that's involved. It's fair for both parties. There's no side that's going to be losing in a contract. At the end of the day, the contract is equitable for all sides. And good contracts, they really start with being in writing, and this is so important because, there's oftentimes someone will sign a contract and they'll forget the terms in the contract, right? They're excited. They're ready to get started. And 6 months later, they're like, hey, what about this? What about that? And that's the reason why it's important to make sure that you document those terms up front. Put those in your contract because you want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to have a full understanding of this contract, that they can read through it, that they can ask questions, that they can modify things if that's needed. And you want that opportunity to be presented to both parties so they can read and know exactly what they're committing to. And by the way, if anybody is getting contracts, make sure you read those contracts. Make sure you don't just scroll through those terms and conditions, but you actually read them, right? Because you don't want to be selling your business right at the end of this contract. You want to make sure that the contract is really equitable, that it's really giving you the service that you really intended to have with that. So it's very important to read those contracts, especially when they come through DocuSign. It's very easy to rapid fire if you're subscribing to something. You never know. You don't want to be selling your firstborn, right? And these contracts. So make sure you're reading those contracts to make sure that, it is doing what you're intending to do, that it has the clauses that you want it to have. So make sure that your contracts are in writing. So if any of you guys are out there still doing those handshake deals, be warned. A lot of times, misunderstandings happen in those verbal contracts, or, what seems like common sense to you, or that obviously would be the next best step. What we find is common sense is not quite so common, right? There's always room for misinterpretation. There's always someone's going to interpret something different than you have. And so you want to get those terms in writing. So make sure that you get those terms in writings for any contract that you might have. If anybody's still doing those handshake deals, get away from those handshake deals. Make sure they're in writing, especially when you want to be mitigating your financial risk. And the other thing is you want to do is when you're creating these contracts, not only are they in writing, but especially in this economic volatility, you want to make sure that these contracts mitigate your risk, right? You don't want to be getting into a contract where, I'm going to be doing your deliveries. I'm going to give it to you at this rate. But at the same time, your costs to perform that contract, right? Those underlying, like if you need fuel, right? If you have to purchase fuel, if you're in logistics where fuel is constantly going up, or if you're purchasing commodities that have a fluctuating price right now or fluctuating ability, right? You want to be able to have mobility in that contract, the ability to increase your prices if your underlying costs go up. You want to be able to pull out of a contract if you're not able to fulfill it for unforeseen circumstances that might happen too. So you want to make sure that your contracts, when they're in writing, they mitigate the risk. And so you want to sit down and you want to think about, what are the risks that I might run into as I'm creating this contract? Are my underlying costs going to go up? Do I have suppliers that are relying on commodities that might not be available? When you're first creating those contracts, you want to sit down and go, what are my underlying risks? What are the things that might happen in the next 12 months that I need to be aware of? I never thought this, I don't know if any of you guys ever eat like pho or pho, I think is what it's called. And there's this like red chili, that you put into these noodles. And I never thought that they're not able to supply chili anymore because of the special pepper that they plant is no longer available. And apparently, no matter where you are in this world, it's going to be hard for you to get that red chili. So imagine being a restaurant that promises that red chili, right? So think about, what things can go wrong in my process and how do I mitigate that? If I know that fuel prices are going to be going up, I need to make sure that my contract allows me to adjust for that, right? Commodities, again, if they're going to be fluctuating in price or availability, I need to make sure that I can fluctuate to that. And, I am a big fan of something called the cost plus model. And, especially now where you're having that volatility, that cost plus model becomes really important because what it allows you to do is to increase your prices in proportion to the increases in costs. A lot of times I'll see this in construction, especially in governmental construction. And they'll say, this is what we're estimating our materials to be. And then we're going to mark it up by, X percent, 30%, that type of thing. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that if you're using a cost plus model, that you recognize the underlying commodity that's driving your prices. For example, if I'm in logistics, right, many drivers are impacted right now by the price of rising diesel. And there's no commodity out there that can jump overnight 20%, right? Like fuel prices. You wake up one day and it's $3.50, the next day it's like $4.50, right? Fuel prices just have that ability to do that. And imagine being locked into a rate where you're going to deliver at this fixed rate while your cost is going up 20% every couple of weeks, right? It doesn't take much time before you start to go into a loss. And so it's important to go, what I can do to mitigate that risk is I can have a cost plus model where, we're going to use a industry index, right? I like Bloomberg. Bloomberg is a great way to track commodities, great way to track fuel prices. It's an index that a lot of the traders will use to monitor pricing on those and state that, we're going to go with the index rate in Bloomberg. If index rate moves 5%, we're going to increase our rate by that percentage, within 30 days. So within 1 month, I'm going to move with that commodity price. So what you've done is you've hedged your risk within your contract. And you've also stated a industry standard index. So now your customers can go, okay, this index is moving in this direction. I know that my price is moving also that way. So definitely look into that cost plus model. Outside of Bloomberg, there's also the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but you want to create that model and pricing where your overall prices are increasing with those commodities that are also in your business that your business is relying on. And what's going to happen is, because you've got that cost plus model, you're going to be able to continue to provide this great service, even though your underlying cost has increased, right? Because you've been able to stabilize those margins, meaning that my cost has gone up, but my margin as a percentage has stabilized. And now I can continue to provide that great service, right? Because I'm not worried about cash flow. I'm not worried about how am I going to fill those tanks or buy those underlying ingredients, right? Because now my prices are also adjusting with the cost that I'm going to incur, right? So definitely look at cost plus models, look at those underlying indexes that track the key ingredients or the key resources that you're going to be using so that you can move in that direction, right? Now, sometimes, you'll also want to be you want your contract to state terms where you can exit gracefully, right? So for example, if I am a supplier of that red chili sauce, then my farmers can't produce the pepper to create the sauce. I'm not going to be able to supply that, right? And so, you want to be able to create those clauses in the contract that, hey, if something happens and I just cannot deliver or you cannot deliver, how do we exit this out gracefully? What does it look like to exit out in 30 days? Or if I'm getting into a contract that I really didn't realize I was going to be underwater on, do I have to renew that within a year? So definitely create those exit terms that you can leave that contract in the event that you would need to have to do that. So how do you gracefully exit for that? A lot of times people don't think about, when they get into partnerships or they get into joint ventures, they don't think about, what could possibly go wrong and how do I exit? And I'll tell you this, one of the best things you can do for your business, let's say if you're entering into a partnership or a joint venture, is think about how do I want to end this before it turns to that point that I have to end this, right? How do I want to end this while everything is still good in the beginning so that in the event that we need to end this, that we can do this? A lot of times when I'll look at partnerships that are forming, one of the things that will advise the partnership is, figure out how you want to value your business. How do you want to value your business in the event of a dissolution? Do you want to do market rate, which can be kind of dangerous? Do you want to do retained earnings, right? Because market rate can be based upon what your future potential earnings are versus retained earnings, which is what we have now. Decide on those terms now so that in the event of an exit strategy, you're not trying to create this, right? That you have a way out. Now, the other thing that I think is important too in mitigating risk is, the last year and a half has been full of so many valuable lessons, right? We've learned so many good things during this pandemic. It's been a challenge in some areas, right? We've had to do more with less resources. We had to do more with less people, right? Sometimes less real estate for those of you guys that had to go virtual, but we've managed, right? We've managed to do more with less during the pandemic, right? Because we couldn't get those supplies in. We couldn't get the people in. And we've learned some really powerful lessons in this, right? We learned how to do with less. And even though the economy changes and people become more available, right? Because the economies open up, it's important not to forget those lessons, not to forget how to do with less, right? And, I'll tell you guys, I went to Walmart the other day. We just got back from our trip and we needed to grab some things. People always get sick on trips. I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with the food on trips. But, we went to Walmart the other day and the weirdest thing happened. I went to this Walmart and, I went there and I promise you, there were no people at the checkout lines, no people at all. Like there were lots of checkout lines, but they were all self-checkout lanes, right? There were no people. And even in like the big lanes, where you have the big like roller things, there were no people, right? And some of these lanes, because I was a little bit like, oh my gosh, I got a lot of groceries, right? Because I'm going to the store, it had this really long roller and there was no person. I was like, okay, I guess I got to figure out how to do this. So I put all my groceries onto this long roller. And as I scanned something, the roller would advance a little bit, just like, when you had like an employee there that was scanning it. Except this time I was scanning my own groceries. I was putting them onto the shelf and it was advancing on my own. And literally I had become my own teller. And it's interesting because what Walmart had to do that brought it to that point that it says, you know what, we're not going to have any more tellers or any more cashiers, was the fact that they couldn't find enough people, right? They couldn't find enough people, to do that, and so they looked at what is the easiest step to automate for them. Stocking shelves is very difficult to automate, but it was much easier to automate the checkout function, right? And so they decided to go 100% in and they automated the entire checkout function. And so what happened was they were only maintaining 3 types of employees. They were maintaining security. So I would randomly check your invoice, right? Your receipt as you checked out and make sure you didn't skip anything. They had people there that could assist with problems, right? People that could say, hey, you're underage, or I need to check your ID. You look kind of young, and they had people that were stocking the shelves, right? So they really eliminated quite a few positions. I'm looking at the number of checkout lines. There had to be at least 20 of them. So they eliminated at least 20 positions and plus the baggers, right? With that. So by automating. And even as labor becomes more available, right? Because my client that I was talking to in my example earlier, which was talking about, making those changes, even though labor is coming more available, Walmart has found a permanent solution that they're never going to need that amount of labor again, right? So again, what I'm saying is embrace those lessons that you learned during the pandemic and continue to follow those new lessons. How did you make do with less? Just because more people are coming onto the market now, you found the way to make it, right? So before you add more headcount, really think about, do I really need to do this? Or can I just continue to further my automation or do with less as I've been doing? So don't forget those habits that you've learned. The other thing that's important with mitigating risk during fluctuating economic times is minimizing your fixed costs, right? And when I talk about fixed costs, I'm talking about those costs that you're locked contractually into each month. Things like your rent, if you guys have any copier leases that they're charging you for, any contractual obligations that are locking you in for a long-term commitment, avoid those fixed costs and those long-term contracts like a plague, right? Because during an economic downturn, what you want to do is you want to keep yourself as nimble as possible, right? So if there's an increase in demand for your product or service, you're able to move with that demand, right? You're able to scale. If there's a decrease in that demand, that you're also able to reduce your costs. And if you're in fixed costs, it's going to be harder to get out of that, right? And so you want to really embrace that concept of how do I stay nimble? How do I stay free? But you want to stay flexible. You want to stay nimble. You want to keep that in front of mind, being nimble during this time. And again, you also want to stay nimble that you're able to scale too, that you're able to move and grow in this. One of the things that I always thought about is, as we were getting lease space, I was like, what happens if we outgrow this, right? You want to be able to do it that way. Discontinue services that you don't need. And I think about when we were trying to expand from a real estate standpoint, the point on my back of my mind was always, how do we continue to grow and rely on more space, when we're locked into a long-term lease, right? Or what if the area changes and we don't want to be in that area anymore? Or, and then when the pandemic hit, there was also the option of going virtual too. So how do you stay nimble? Embrace those variable contracts that are going to allow you to adapt over time, that you're going to be able to increase usage as you need it, decrease usage as you don't, and avoid those fixed costs of a plague. Always say, give me 24 hours to think about a fixed contract before I go ahead and do that. The other thing that you want to do is, a lot of you have learned to make do with less. I want you to think about vendors versus employees, right? Can somebody else do this part of your manufacturing or your service better for less, right? Can they do it at a better quality for a less cost, or at least the same quality as you can? And in this case, consider outsourcing. What can be done better for less cost? And right now we're seeing a lot of partnerships being formed, partnerships even amongst competitors in the same industries that are being formed. And we're seeing a lot of, like, and then what I mean by that, for example, let's say you have a consultant and they might bring somebody else in with another expertise that they normally would compete with in order to best serve their client, right? So now they don't have to hire on this expertise. They can rent this expertise, right, for this particular event that's happening. We're seeing a lot of staff sharing. I know in the accounting industry, they're like, hey, I'm short staff on this area. Can I borrow some of your staff to finish this project here? So we're seeing a lot of staff sharing that's happening right now. Again, keeping overhead costs lower, keeping long-term costs lower by borrowing staff right now. We're seeing sharing of overhead staff. So, where if you can share secretaries, you can share cleaning costs, you can share overhead. We're seeing this a lot in shared office space, especially amongst the medical industry, where you might have a dermatologist that's partnering with a plastic surgeon and a dentist, and they're sharing one building, right? We're also seeing this in the consulting industry too, where you've got people that, they have specialized niches, but they're able to share that same admin or that admin team or that staff team, which is really great with that. So again, sharing that technical knowledge, looking for ways to partner with people that allow you to present that same great product or service, but at a lesser cost with lesser commitment, right? Long-term commitment versus hiring that expertise on, partnering with someone that has it on a contractual basis in order to maintain those costs. And it's also important that when you're using vendors, you want to also not just hire them, but you want to vet them to make sure they're going to be viable during this economic fluctuation too, right? Because, their success is contingent upon your success, right? Or your success is contingent upon their success and their ability to fulfill their commitment to you. So ask those vendors, have a heart-to-heart meeting. Hey, we rely on you. We cannot deliver unless you deliver to us. And so what are you doing to hedge your risk? What are the things that are coming up in your pipeline, the challenges that you're seeing in your pipeline that might affect your ability to meet our demand? And how are you mitigating that risk? And not just doing it over short term, doing it over long term. Like what are the commitments that you see over the next 12 months, right? That might be affecting you. And how are you mitigating that? Because you want to make sure that your vendors are also thinking about this, especially when they're key suppliers for you. And how are they going to mitigate that risk? Because that is going to impact you too. So you definitely want to make sure that you're doing that. And then also, continue to evaluate your expenses, right? Look at your expenses, look at your profit and loss statement, and look for opportunities to cut expenses that are no longer adding value for you, right? So look at those profit and loss statements, deep dive into that, drill down in those accounts, look at those credit card statements, those debit transactions that are happening, those checks are being written, and go, what? Do I still need these things? Are they still adding value? And what am I paying for that I really just don't need anymore? One of the things that we did in our firm recently was we just reduced our Zoom subscriptions by like half, right? Everybody had a Zoom account in our firm. And, what we were noticing that a lot of the larger companies that we were having meetings with, like the SEC companies, they were using Microsoft Teams. And, it's fine to use Zoom when you have like a team of like 10, but, it can get kind of expensive if you have a team of 50. And so, we said, we're just going to start having meetings on Microsoft Teams, right? Which we're already paying for, right? With our Office subscription. Why not use that more fully? So again, what I'm saying is look for opportunities to consolidate or eliminate expenses. What can you do more with while paying less, right? So using Teams instead of Zoom, that type of thing. So hopefully I just didn't tank the share price of Zoom. I wasn't trying to do that, but that was just something that we had did with our company there. The other thing is, when you're trying to mitigate risk, it's really important to be able to notice when things change, even by a hairline. You want to notice that things are changing. And for those of you guys that have materials and subs accounts or mats and subs accounts, one of the things that's really important is to look at that percentage, especially when you're doing transfers. You got a set percentage that's going to mats and subs. And what you want to do is you want to detect if you're going outside of that percentage. If my fuel prices are going up, my mats and subs are larger, right? Then I know there's something wrong with my billing rate, right? That I need to increase my billing rate. And so constantly look at your materials and subs as a percentage of your total revenue and make sure that it's staying in line with your TAP transfer percentage, because that is a way of detecting when inflation is catching up with you. And you want to make sure you're looking at that every single month because you want to be able to adjust with it. I was had a discussion with one client And, he was nervous about raising prices, right? And he had raised it, I think he said in January. And I was showing him his numbers and they were like 15% more than what it was in January. And I said, you know what? If you don't raise it now, and everybody has raised it up until this point, and they're going to raise it again in December, it's going to be a lot harder for you to jump, right? To get to what the market rate is with your clients. Cause they're like, hey, you're like, you're increasing it now like 30% versus 15. And so what you want to do is make sure you're watching those materials and subs as a proportion of your revenue compared to your tap transfer allocation percentage, because, you want to make sure that you're keeping up with those inflation adjustments. So look at those common size percentages, and really make sure you're comparing it period to period and you're making those adjustments timely with that. Another thing that's important too is look at your labor, your direct labor as a percentage of your revenue too. That's another sneaky thing that's happening. Labor costs, especially in more of the traditional service types of jobs or blue collar type of jobs, labor has gone up significantly compared to some industries, like more your white collar industries. And so look at that percentage, because again, you may need to, it's either an efficiency issue where your team is not as efficient because you're holding on to people because you're afraid to lose them because of what we just went through. I call it PTSD with the hiring. And so you have efficiency issues, or you've got pricing, right? Meaning that your labor cost has gone up and now you got to increase your prices in proportion to that labor cost. So looking at that mats and subs as a percentage of revenue, as well as your labor cost, direct labor costs as a percentage of revenue, to make sure that your pricing stays in line, and make sure you're adjusting in order to maintain those margins is something that you want to make sure that you're doing during this time. Now, another thing that's important is you guys have developed some really amazing habits, right? You've developed the profit first model, you've implemented in your business, you have results that are working for you. They work for you during the pandemic and they're continuing to work for you. Do not let the good habits go. Do not let the good habits go. You worked hard to create those good habits. Stay within those tabs. Stay within those tabs. If you're finding that mats and subs is harder to do, make that course correction, right? So stay with the things that are working for you. This model has worked for you. It worked with you during the pandemic. It's also going to work with you throughout the recession too. I always tell people, everybody's like, oh, it's a recession. I said, you know what? You can have your most profitable year during a recession. Yes, you can have your absolutely most profitable year during a recession. You just have to know how to adjust. You have to know how to change, and you have to remain agile so that you can listen to the market and flux in the market. And that's the key with being successful on profit first during a recession, just remaining agile, remaining the ability to adjust and be able to change. And you do that through your contracts, knowing what the drivers are in your business that increase your costs, and making sure that you can mitigate those costs through those cost plus contracts that we talked about, right? It talks about knowing what your risks are for your vendors, right? And then keeping those habits that you learned in the pandemic. You learn to do more with less. And how do we continue to do more with less and keep those costs down? So I hope that today was extremely helpful for you guys. It's been amazing spending time with you guys. I look forward to seeing you guys next time.